Arthur Vance, Interim COO, Transition Operations, Orion Global. I slid that simple business card across the polished expanse of the boardroom table, a quiet final play in a high-stakes game I had been forced into for months. The kid's face, which moments before had been flushed with triumph, lost all its color, turning as pale as a fresh sheet of copy paper. A mere 20 minutes earlier, Chadwick Sterling had publicly fired me in front of the entire executive team from our acquiring company. Now, he was staring at my new title as if I had just declared that gravity was a personal opinion he wasn't qualified to hold. But let me go back. Let me walk you through how a 52-year-old Navy veteran ended up schooling a kid born with a silver spoon on the harsh realities of corporate warfare. My name is Arthur Vance. Most people know me as Art. It was a nickname I earned in the Navy Reserves a lifetime ago, back when I was still naive enough to think that hard work and integrity were the main currencies in the business world. As it happens, they are, just not in the way the motivational posters claim. I had been the operational spine of Keystone Innovations for 15 years. I joined as an operations manager when we were a small team of 30 people squeezed into a rented office space above a laundromat. I personally designed every single system that made our company an attractive $750 million acquisition target for Orion Global. Every supplier contract, every single compliance framework, every emergency procedure that saved our bacon when the world turned upside down. I was the bedrock. Then, our founder and CEO decided to call it a day. No grand farewell, no carefully orchestrated succession plan, just a short, sentimental email on a Friday afternoon and a gaping, empty corner office by Monday morning. That's when Chadwick Sterling made his entrance. The kid was 26 years old, the former CEO's nephew. Let that marinate for a moment. He had a brand new MBA from a university more famous for its sailing team than its academics, and exactly 0 days of experience in any role that didn't involve getting coffee. The very first thing he did was get himself a glossy, laminated ID badge and claim a mug from the kitchen that said, "World's Most Adequate Boss." I should have recognized the warning signs right there. We were in for a turbulent flight. Chadwick, or Chad as he insisted on being called, convened an all-hands meeting on his first day. He strolled in wearing a blazer that probably cost more than my first car and opened with this absolute masterpiece. We're going to synergize our core competencies and disrupt the existing paradigms, people. I looked around the room. Our head of finance, a brilliant woman of 45, was putting 2 children through college. Our director of logistics had been managing global supply chains since before Chad even had a driver's permit. These were not individuals who needed their paradigms disrupted. They needed competent leadership and a firm, steady hand at the wheel. But Chad, naturally, had different ideas. You see, there is a vast gulf between performing leadership and actually leading. I learned that in the Navy. Real leadership isn't about giving grand speeches. It's hidden in the thankless details that nobody else wants to deal with. It's in the fine print of vendor agreements that ensure your materials show up on time. It's in the mind-numbing compliance reports that keep federal regulators from putting a padlock on your doors. It's in the redundant backup systems that keep everything running when a server inevitably fails at 3 a.m. Chad's concept of leadership was a deck of colorful PowerPoint slides and a vocabulary packed with the latest corporate jargon. Within a week, the fractures began to appear. 3 of my fellow department heads were calling my personal phone, not Chad's. Our legal team was at a standstill on our most important client contract because Chad insisted he had ultimate signature authority, which he seemed to think was a state of being, not a specific tiered permission within our secure digital platform. The finance department couldn't get crucial budget approvals because the kid would just respond, "Let's circle back to every single request," as if it were a magical phrase that made fiscal duties disappear. Procurement was completely stalled because Chad had streamlined our vendor vetting process by simply removing the steps where we confirmed that a potential partner was a legitimate company and not a shell corporation operating out of a garage. And what about me? I just kept the ship from sinking. I made the quiet phone calls. I smoothed over the ruffled feathers. I worked through the weekends, extinguishing the operational fires he had ignited during the week with his innovations. Look, I'm 52. My daughter is a senior in college, and that's a $35,000 a year expense that doesn't just pause because the new boss is an incompetent fool. My wife, Helen, has endured my 15 years of long hours and missed dinners because she believed, like I did, that I was building something real, something that would provide for our future. I wasn't going to let some kid with a fancy degree and a trust fund send all of that spiraling down the drain, but I was worn out. Tired to my very bones, not just from the additional workload, but from the soul-crushing ordeal of watching 15 years of meticulous, careful work being taken apart by someone who truly believed that progress involved bulldozing everything that had come before him. That complex logistics network that enabled us to reroute shipments and save millions during the port congestion. I sketched that out on a yellow legal pad. Those solid vendor relationships that gave us priority access to materials when global supply chains broke down. I forged those with years of mutual respect. The disaster recovery plan that had us operational again in 4 hours when a power surge fried our main server. I wrote that on a Sunday, while Chad was likely at brunch, posting motivational quotes to his Instagram story. So, when Eleanor Hayes from Orion Global contacted me, asking if we had any existing continuity plans to assist with the acquisition's due diligence, I didn't hesitate. I didn't feed her the company-approved spin. I gave her the unvarnished reality. It was a single, password-protected document, a playbook that illustrated how Keystone truly operated, not how Chad's PowerPoint presentations claimed it operated. The real systems, the essential people who knew their jobs, the vendor partnerships that were the very lifeblood of our profitability. I wasn't attempting to be a hero or even to save my own job. I had already started updating my resume, but I would be damned if I was going to let my life's work be misrepresented and obliterated by sheer incompetence. Eleanor's response arrived in less than an hour. "This is incredibly insightful, Arthur. May I share this with Chad?" I typed back. "Perhaps hold off on that for now." That was the catalyst. That was the instant the ground shifted under me. Suddenly, I began getting copied on email threads I had no business being on. Internal risk assessments from Orion's own due diligence teams, detailed integration schedules that listed my name specifically as a point of contact for operational data, human resources projections that mentioned retention of key operational personnel. Then Eleanor sent me a direct message on our secure chat system. "Art, what's your personal assessment of the vendor integration timeline under the current leadership structure?" She didn't ask for Chad's opinion. She asked me, directly. Then came the legal document. It landed in my personal email at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday. The subject line was empty. The only thing in the body was an attachment named Keystone Transition Staffing, Internal Draft. I was expecting the usual barrage of corporate legalese. Instead, I discovered something that made my heart pound a little faster. Under the section Key Personnel, Transition Phase, there was a line item for a continuity lead. The name field was blank, an empty space waiting to be filled. I saved that email to a folder on my desktop that I had cryptically labeled Insurance, because I understood that some corporate battles aren't won with loud confrontations in boardrooms. They're won with quiet footnotes and overlooked clauses in organizational charts that no one reads until it's far too late. Meanwhile, Chad was fully engaged in his CEO roleplay. He brought in his college roommate, Kyle Gibson, as the new Director of Strategic Innovation. That is not a real position. That's the title you give your friend when you want to put him on the payroll but can't come up with any actual work for him to do. Kyle showed up with a fancy standing desk, a professional ring light for his video conferences, and a massive whiteboard that he immediately filled with words like synergy, scalability, and disruption. His entire professional history consisted of managing the budget for his fraternity's keg parties. Within a few days, the real harm started. Our entire vendor payment system froze. Kyle had optimized the approval workflow by removing 2 verification steps that weren't there for the sake of efficiency. They were there because they were required by federal anti-fraud regulations. They were, in essence, legally mandated. The CFO of one of our biggest suppliers physically drove to our office and threatened to have his trucks reclaim a shipment of critical components right from our factory floor. They had been waiting 3 weeks for a payment that was hopelessly stuck in Kyle's improved system. I found Chad and Kyle in the break room laughing over protein bars, completely unaware as our entire supply chain was on the verge of collapse. "We have a catastrophic issue with vendor payments," I told him, keeping my voice steady. He held up a hand, cutting me off mid-sentence. "Art, maybe if you focused less on problems and more on solutions, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Your operations. Let the strategy guys worry about the big picture. Just operations." As if I hadn't personally negotiated the very contracts that kept our margins strong. As if I hadn't already taken 5 frantic calls from angry vendors that morning while Kyle was probably adjusting the lighting for his next thought leadership selfie. That's when I shut down. I stopped speaking up in meetings. It was simple, because I was no longer invited to most of them. Chad had officially labelled me as resistant to change and excluded me from all strategic talks, so I stopped offering solutions. I stopped volunteering to put out fires before they became raging infernos. I just observed. I documented everything, and I quietly braced myself for the inevitable crash. Because a fool will always stumble over his own feet eventually. The problem was, this particular fool was threatening to drag my entire company, my entire career, down with him. 3 weeks after Chad took over, our most critical logistics partnership fell apart. Kyle had missed a crucial contract renewal deadline, not by a day or two, by 3 weeks. The agreement that was the foundation of our entire East Coast distribution network had simply lapsed because he thought auto-renewal meant it renewed itself through some kind of magic with no human involvement or paperwork needed. Our logistics partner, a company we had worked with for a decade, gave us an ultimatum. Resolve it in 48 hours, or our account would be demoted to the bottom of their priority list. In the world of logistics, that's the corporate equivalent of being told your house is on fire and the fire department will get to you sometime next month. Orion's legal team flagged the problem almost immediately. These people were not fools. They could see the operational foundation of their multi-million-dollar acquisition disintegrating in real time. Our own finance director called me, her voice shaking with panic. "Art, do we have any backup logistics contacts? Any at all?" Of course I did. I had put together a comprehensive backup vendor list months ago, sensing this disaster was on the horizon. I forwarded it to her quietly. I didn't copy Chad. I didn't make a big show of saving the day. I just provided her with the tools she needed to prevent the company from completely imploding. But Orion took notice. That's when Eleanor reached out again, personally, not through any official channel, just a direct message. "You okay over there? Just checking in." 7 simple words that told me everything I needed to know. If a senior VP from the acquiring company was checking on me personally, it meant my strategic silence was now shouting louder than all of Chad's noisy incompetence. It meant I had leverage I hadn't even known I had. I wrote back, holding steady. "But you might want to have your legal team take a close look at the acquisition draft, page 14, paragraph 3, subsection E." I didn't explain what it said. I didn't need to, because that subsection was the part nobody ever reads. It was the legal fine print buried deep within 70 pages of boilerplate that stipulated any and all staffing decisions related to key operational personnel had to be ratified by someone in a position called the continuity lead. And as far as I knew, that position was still unfilled. The first unofficial briefing occurred by what I told myself was a coincidence. We were supposed to be in a meeting with Orion's integration team to review asset inventories, standard due diligence. But Chad was experiencing what he termed delegate fatigue, so he just forwarded the meeting invitation to me without even glancing at the agenda. Marcus Thorne, one of Orion's senior VPs, asked a direct question about our vendor performance metrics over the last 3 fiscal years, a basic question for anyone who had actually been managing operations. Chad just stared at him blankly, as if he'd been asked to recite the periodic table in Mandarin. I let the silence stretch in the air for a moment. Then I spoke up. "You'll find those metrics in tab 2 of the operations dashboard I sent over last week. Lines 42 through 68 include the recovery data for any late-cycle fulfillment issues." There was a dead silence that lasted about 5 seconds. Then Marcus said, "Perfect. Thanks, Art." After the call, a message appeared from Orion's integration office. "Would you have time for a quick, informal call about operational continuity?" I thought about it for all of 30 seconds. I wasn't going to violate NDAS or burn the company down just to win at office politics. But I also wasn't going to stand by and watch 15 years of my life's work be incinerated by a child playing CEO. One call, 15 minutes. Kept off the official schedule. That one call led to 3 more by the end of that week. I never gave my opinion. I never once spoke ill of Chad or Kyle. I just answered their questions with data. Do you have post-acquisition risk assessments? Yes, I created them last quarter. Here they are. Any concerns about the compliance software migration? Yes. Here's the complete audit trail showing the potential points of failure. Any indication that the current leadership isn't aligned on Q4 deliverables? For that one, I simply attached 2 conflicting strategy documents. One meticulously prepared by our finance team and one that looked like it was scribbled on a napkin by Chad during a fever dream. I never had to say, "I told you so." The documentation spoke for itself. By the 3rd call, the entire atmosphere had changed. Marcus brought Eleanor, then Eleanor brought another executive, then their lead counsel joined. They stopped calling it an informal chat and started calling it a transition review. That's when Eleanor asked the question that altered everything. Art, if you could define the ideal role for yourself post-acquisition to ensure total operational continuity, what would that look like? I didn't even have to consider it. Interim Chief Operating Officer for Transition Operations. Not permanent, not glamorous, just honest. I didn't want a fancy title or a corner office. I wanted command of the bridge long enough to guide the ship through the storm that I knew was approaching. Eleanor nodded slowly and typed something on her laptop that I couldn't see. 2 days after that, a lawyer from Orion sent me a document titled Transition Staffing Notes, Internal Review Only. I read it twice, then a 3rd time just to be certain. My name was there, in the slot for the continuity lead, and next to it was a small checkbox. It was checked. Meanwhile, Chad was busy hosting Innovation Fridays with beanbag chairs and kombucha on tap. He asked the finance team why cash flow couldn't just mean selling more products. He suggested we disrupt our federal compliance protocols because they were slowing down our velocity. He had no idea about the secret calls, no clue about the documents being passed back and forth. He was completely unaware that the acquisition agreement he had signed in blind faith contained a provision that was about to obliterate his entire career. The final breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. Chad posted a company-wide announcement on our internal messaging platform. Huge win, team! We've successfully migrated all compliance workflows to a new, cloud-based AI solution. Faster, cheaper, better. I had to read it 3 times to believe he had actually written that he had unilaterally moved the systems that managed all legal and financial documentation for a $750 million acquisition. My phone started ringing off the hook within an hour. The legal department couldn't access any contract databases. Vendor management was locked out of all approval workflows. Procurement was trapped in an endless loop with a customer service chatbot that responded to every query with, "I'm still learning, thanks for your patience." 5 of our most critical suppliers were completely frozen in the new system. No tax documentation, no background verification, no payment authorization. One of them formally threatened to involve their legal team if we couldn't resolve the problem by the end of the business day. I found Chad in the break room, hosting something he called Transformation Tuesday. He was sipping cucumber-infused water and drawing nonsensical flowcharts on butcher paper, while the company he was supposed to be leading burned down around him. "We have a critical failure," I told him bluntly. "The compliance migration you ordered has broken everything." He looked up from his drawing and gave me a condescending smile. "Minor hiccup article, just growing pains." The sales rep assured me their AI platform is designed to scale with organizational needs. Their AI doesn't file SEC reports, Chad. He just blinked at me, as if I had just made up the term SEC on the spot. Eleanor from Orion was on an emergency video call within 2 hours. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't even sound angry, she just asked one simple question. Who authorized this system migration? Chad opened his mouth to start spinning some tale, but I cut him off. "I'll send you a complete breakdown," I said, looking directly at Eleanor through the camera. Decision logs, approval chains, timeline documentation. I had it all. Screenshots of the chat logs where Chad told Kyle to just rip the band-aid off. email threads where department heads had pleaded for more time to test the new system, meeting notes where I had specifically warned about the catastrophic compliance risks. I bundled it all into one neat, tidy package and sent it directly to Eleanor, time-stamped, documented, and irrefutable. Of course, Chad tried to spin it. He told Orion's team that I had been resistant to innovation, that I had intentionally created gaps in the legacy system, and that he was simply future-proofing our operations while I was too stuck in the past to adapt. What he didn't know was that I had documented those conversations too. When Eleanor received my second email package, her only reply was a single word: received. After that, 2 days of radio silence. Then something interesting happened. I wasn't officially invited to Orion's internal integration planning meeting, but when the meeting notes were distributed, my name was on almost every action item: vendor impact assessment, Art V to provide timeline, system restoration roadmap, Art V to lead analysis, compliance review, reference arts audit documentation. Chad's name wasn't mentioned a single time. That's when I knew this was no longer about cleaning up his messes. He wasn't just incompetent anymore. He was a liability, a direct and verifiable threat to the deal that I had spent 15 years of my life helping to build. So I stopped trying to work with him. I stopped explaining why his half-baked ideas would fail. I stopped warning him about the icebergs dead ahead. I just started preparing for the endgame. The contract sat in my personal inbox for 2 weeks. The subject line read, Keystone Innovations, Transition Staffing Agreement, Final Draft. I didn't open it immediately. Not because I was nervous about what it contained, because I already knew what it didn't contain: Chad's awareness. He never mentioned getting such a document. He probably thought it was just more legal paperwork for the lawyers to deal with. He didn't understand that the most powerful words in the corporate world aren't the ones shouted in boardrooms. They're the ones quietly hidden in paragraph 3E on page 14, the page nobody ever bothers to read. The morning I finally opened it, another supplier had just escalated a payment freeze to their legal department. Kyle had sent a company-wide email blaming legacy workflow baggage for the ongoing operational problems, and Chad was in his office, practicing a presentation about synergistic value creation. I sat down with a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt plastic and clicked the file open. It was 73 pages of dense legal language, charts, compliance checklists, and signature lines, standard acquisition paperwork. I scrolled through most of it, my eyes searching for what I knew was there. Page 14, paragraph 3E. All staffing decisions related to transition phase operational personnel must receive final approval from the designated continuity lead, whose authority may not be overridden by temporary or interim executives not ratified by the acquiring company's board of directors. And then one more line below it. Continuity lead, Arthur Vance. I just stared at my name, sitting there, in plain black and white, as if it had always been there. They had hidden a tactical nuke in the middle of the contract. Chad had signed it, thinking it was a simple formality. He had legally authorized a document that gave me more direct operational authority than he himself had. Orion had done it intentionally, quietly, and completely legally. I hadn't even had to ask. I forwarded the file to my personal email with the subject line checkmate and walked past Chad's office. He was in there, scrolling through TikTok videos about leadership while eating a kale salad that probably cost more than my lunch budget for the entire week. He didn't even look up. I just kept walking, because I knew something he didn't. He thought he was in charge of the transition, but I was the transition. The morning before the final acquisition meeting, Chad sent out another company-wide email. The subject was "The Future Starts Tomorrow. Keystone joins Orion." It was 5 paragraphs of pure nonsense about transformational synergies and next-level operational excellence. He thanked everyone for their resilience and adaptability during this exciting journey. I read the words "operational excellence" and almost choked on my coffee. This was a man who had asked me last week if gross margin meant we were being rude to our customers. That evening, I got a message I wasn't expecting. It was short, direct, and from David Harrison himself, the CEO of Orion Global. "Bring your business cards tomorrow." 5 words that hit me like a punch to the gut, but in a good way. Because a man like David Harrison doesn't waste time on small talk. If he was telling me to bring cards, it meant he already knew exactly how the next day was going to unfold. I typed back, "Understood." Then I went home and told Helen we might have a reason to open that good bottle of wine tomorrow night. I couldn't tell her why just yet. But after 15 years of cancelled plans and working weekends, I figured she deserved a little warning that things were finally about to change. The final meeting was set for 10 a.m. in the main conference room. It was pure corporate theatre, a mahogany table that likely cost more than my daughter's first year of college, overstuffed leather chairs that sighed every time you moved, a panoramic window with a view of the same parking lot I'd been pulling into at 7 a.m. for the last 15 years. Orion's entire leadership team was present. David Harrison sat at the head of the table, a man with the calm, unreadable expression of someone who had witnessed every power play ever conceived. Eleanor and Marcus flanked him like loyal lieutenants. Their legal counsel sat silently with a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. On our side, it was Chad, Kyle, our terrified-looking HR director, and me, sitting in a chair in the back corner like a forgotten piece of furniture. Chad had dressed for what he believed was his coronation. New suit, sharp haircut, and enough cologne to be smelled from orbit. He'd even brought a PowerPoint presentation ready to go on his laptop. The first slide read, Keystone 2.0, streamlined, synchronized, superior. I honestly wish I was making that up. Harrison started the meeting with the no-nonsense brevity I'd come to expect. Let's review the final transition timeline and the key personnel assignments. Chad immediately jumped in, practically bouncing in his seat like a game show host. Absolutely, David. We're excited, we're aligned, and we're ready to hit the ground running. This acquisition represents the next evolution of Keystone Innovations. We're going to be leaner, smarter, and more agile than ever before. He clicked to his second slide. It was a new organizational chart. His name was in a big box at the very top, with arrows pointing down to everyone else, including a small box off to the side labeled Outgoing Personnel. My name was in it. I want to personally thank everyone who helped us get to this pivotal moment, he continued, gesturing vaguely at the room, including Art Vance, who will be transitioning out over the next 2 weeks to make room for our new, more dynamic operational structure. And there it was, said with a dismissive wave, as if he were doing me a favor, as if I should stand up and thank him for the privilege of being publicly executed in front of the 6 executives from our new parent company. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The air in the room grew heavy. I reached into my jacket pocket, my fingers closing around a single crisp business card. Matte black cardstock, clean, white, professional font. Arthur Vance, Interim COO, Transition Operations. Orion Global. I slid it across the polished table toward David Harrison without saying a single word. He picked it up. He read it. And then came a sound I will never forget for as long as I live. Laughter. Not a chuckle. Not a mean-spirited laugh. It was a deep, genuine, delighted laugh. The sound of a man who had just been handed the perfect punchline to a joke he'd been waiting months to hear. Chad's plastic smile faltered. Something funny, David? Harrison didn't answer him. He just passed my card to Eleanor, who read it and broke into a grin that was pure, unadulterated triumph. Then Marcus opened his folder, slowly, deliberately. He flipped directly to a page marked with a yellow sticky tab. Page 14. You could hear Kyle's chair squeak as he shifted uncomfortably. Our HR director suddenly became intensely fascinated by the pattern of her own fingernails. Chad tried to wrestle back control, his voice a little too loud. I think there might be some confusion here. Art doesn't represent Orion. He's just here to provide some operational context during the handover. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice as calm and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. Actually, Mr. Sterling, Art represents the transition leadership for Keystone's operational integration. That authority was established in the staffing agreement you signed 3 weeks ago. Chad's face went white. That's not possible. There's no way that's legally binding. Harrison slid the signed contract across the table, stopping it right in front of Chad. Page 14, paragraph 3, E. Arthur Vance, designated continuity lead, final authority over all staffing decisions related to operational personnel during the transition period. Chad stared at the document as if it were written in ancient runes, which in a way it was. It was written in the foreign language of actually reading the things you sign. This was never discussed. He was never supposed to have that kind of authority. He caught himself, but it was too late. Harrison leaned back in his chair, a man settling in to watch a movie he'd already seen and loved. Your signature is right there on page 73, Mr. Sterling, right below the clause that grants Mr. Vance full operational control for the next 90 days. The room went so quiet you could hear the hum of the HVAC system. Chad's mouth opened and closed like a fish desperately trying to understand air. His hands hovered over the table, searching for something to grab onto that simply wasn't there. But he reports to me. He's operations. I'm executive leadership. Harrison smiled, the way a grandmaster smiles when he places his opponent in checkmate. Not anymore. Harrison cleared his throat and read directly from the contract, his voice slow and deliberate, like a judge delivering a verdict. All transition staffing and operational decisions fall under the final authority of the designated continuity lead, Arthur Vance. Any unilateral personnel changes made by non-board approved interim executives are considered null and void. Chad didn't sit down. He didn't storm out. He just stood there, frozen, like someone had pulled his plug from the wall. Kyle, the director of strategic innovation, whispered something into his phone and quietly slipped out of the room. A smart move. Rats are always the first to know when the ship is going down. Our HR director was now studying the wood grain on the conference table as if it were the most fascinating thing she had ever seen. There has to be some mistake, Chad said finally, his voice cracking on the word mistake. This was never discussed. I didn't authorize Art to have any kind of executive authority. Eleanor spoke up again, her gaze fixed on him. Your signature says otherwise, Mr. Sterling. Page 73, right next to Art's appointment as continuity lead. Harrison physically turned the contract around so Chad could see his own signature. Bold black ink on crisp white paper, right below the paragraph that had just vaporized his corporate career. Our legal team said it was just standard transition paperwork. Boilerplate stuff. It was standard, Harrison said coolly. Standard for an acquisition where the interim leadership is deemed to lack sufficient operational experience. That sentence hung in the air for 10 long seconds. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like everyone in the room has forgotten how to breathe. Chad made one last, desperate attempt. But Art reports to me. He's been reporting to me for months. I am the executive in charge of this transition. Harrison didn't raise his voice. He didn't even shift his expression. He just leaned back in his chair, a man making one final, decisive move on the chessboard. About that transition, Chad, we're making some adjustments to your role as well. Marcus pulled out another folder. This one was ominously thin, just a single page. Effective immediately, you'll be reassigned to a facilities management position at our distribution center in Omaha, Nebraska. Night shift. We feel you could use some experience coordinating forklift schedules and loading dock rotations. The silence in the room became absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. Chad's mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. Omaha, he finally managed to whisper. It's a fantastic logistics hub, Harrison said, his tone pleasant. A great opportunity to learn ground-level operations. Very character-building work. Night shift, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., Thursday through Monday. Omaha gets pretty cold in the winter, so you'll want to invest in a good coat. I watched Chad's face cycle through about 5 different emotions in 5 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, panic, rage, and then, finally, a hollowed-out confusion. You can't be serious. Eleanor slid a single sheet of paper across the table. Your new assignment letter. Same pay grade, just different responsibilities. Orion values hands-on operational experience at every level of the company, same pay grade. That was the final, elegant twist of the knife. They weren't firing him. They were reassigning him, giving him exactly the kind of role he clearly thought I deserved. Chad picked up the piece of paper as if it were radioactive. He read it twice, his hands shaking slightly. You can't just reassign me to manual labor. I have an MBA. I've been running this company. Harrison's expression remained unchanged, and Art has been building it for 15 years. We tend to prefer experience over credentials. I didn't say a word. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. I just sat there and watched 15 years of hard work, of showing up early and staying late, get validated by the only people whose opinions actually mattered. Marcus handed me a thick, cream-colored envelope, Orion letterhead. Inside was my official appointment letter. Interim COO, Transition Operations. 90-day term with an automatic review for a permanent position, a salary bump that would not only cover my daughter's tuition, but would also let Helen and me breathe for the first time in years, and a new Orion Global ID badge, Arthur Vance, Interim COO. I clipped it to my jacket pocket. The soft plastic click seemed to echo in the silent room. "Thank you," I said, the first words I'd spoken since this all began. "I'm looking forward to getting started." I stood up and shook hands with Harrison, Eleanor, and Marcus. It was professional, courteous, just another day at the office. As I turned to leave, I heard Chad's voice one last time, soft and broken. "Art? Wait, you knew about this the whole time, didn't you?" I turned back to him. The kid was still standing there holding his reassignment letter like it was a death sentence. "I knew you were in over your head, Chad," I said, my voice even. "I tried to help you. You told me to stay in my lane, but you planned this. You set me up." I considered that for a moment. "No, Chad, I just did my job. You signed a contract without reading it. I read everything. That's the difference between us." He looked like he wanted to say more. Maybe to argue, maybe to apologize for the 2 months he'd spent treating me and my life's work like an obsolete piece of equipment. Instead, he just stood there, deflated, as the new leadership team filed out of the room. I was almost to the door when I heard him one last time, a pathetic whisper. "Omaha?" I didn't turn around. I hear they have great stakes, and that was it. 15 years of building something real, 2 months of watching a fool try to tear it down, and one simple business card that changed the entire game. I walked back to my desk, my old desk, and started making a list of everything that needed to be fixed. Vendor relationships to repair, compliance systems to restore, operational procedures to document for the new team, real work, the kind of thankless, detail-oriented work that keeps companies running and people employed, the work I'd been doing all along. 3 hours later, Helen called to ask how the meeting went. "Good," I told her, a real smile spreading across my face. "Really good." "How does dinner at that expensive steakhouse sound tonight? Can we afford it?" she asked, her voice cautious. I looked down at the new Orion badge clipped to my jacket. "Yeah," I said, "we can afford it." That evening, while Helen and I were sharing a bottle of wine that didn't come from the bottom shelf, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "This is Chad. I start in Omaha next week. I think I'm starting to understand what you were trying to tell me." I showed the message to Helen. She read it, then looked up at me. "Are you going to respond?" I thought about it. The kid was 26 years old. He had just learned the most brutal and valuable lesson in business. Authority without competence is just temporary noise. I typed back, "Good luck. Keep your head down and learn the real operations from the ground up. You might surprise yourself," he replied almost immediately. "Thanks." That was the last I ever heard from Chad Sterling. 6 months later, I got a call from Eleanor Hayes. Orion's board wanted to make my interim position permanent. Full COO role, stock options, the whole 9 yards. I said yes. Sometimes the system actually works. Sometimes experience really does trump connections, and competence wins out over politics. Sometimes the guy who actually knows how to run the machine gets handed the keys. The Navy taught me that real victory isn't about glory. It's about seeing the mission through to completion, and my mission all along was just to keep the lights on while everyone else was busy figuring out who was really in charge. Turns out it was me. I just had to wait for them to read the fine print. End of story.